they want to.
And welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DiRienzo. Got another great show in store. My guest, Desiree DeLoach, who I just met a few days ago, but we had a very interesting conversation, and I knew she'd be a great guest for the program. She's been to Cuba 3 times, including relatively recently. She's a freelance photographer, and she was involved with Occupy Wall Street. So I know we got a lot to talk about. So welcome to the show, Desiree.
Thank you very much for having me, Paul.
Great to have you on. All right, so let's begin by talking about Cuba, because that's the thing that, you know, when we were talking, you've been there, right?
Yes.
You were there relatively recently?
Yes, I just got back about 2 weeks ago. It was my 3rd trip to Cuba. I go with a group, it's called the Venceremos Brigade, and they've been going since 1969. They were actually the first solidarity group to go to Cuba after the revolution. And we just celebrated 46 years, and it's really, really interesting. I learn more things every time I go.
Great. And how long were you there this trip?
2 weeks. Each trip is 2 weeks long.
Okay, and tell me some of the things you did. What's it like to enter Cuba? How do you, as an American citizen, until recently, were pretty much banned from going there, except as journalists. How do you go there?
So we actually do a civil disobedience. Our group, the Venceremos Brigade, has never asked for a license. So we actually go through Canada. Sometimes they've gone through Mexico, but now recently we've been going through Canada. So we take a bus from New York City to Canada, and then we fly into Cuba, and then we do the same thing on the return trip. However, on the return trip, we walk across the International Peace Bridge into U.S. Customs, and we're chanting, we have posters and our luggage, and we're shouting and saying that we've just been to Cuba, and so we commit a civil disobedience since we don't have a license.
Do they ever say anything to you about it when you come in?
Absolutely. This year was actually very smooth. Everybody got through, no one got their bags checked. Probably because of the new relations, but the last 2 years and previous years have not been so easy.
What happened the last time in the previous years?
So last year, actually the first year, I had my bag emptied by a U.S. Customs agent. They just dumped it. And we actually go through a lot of a legal process before we come through, so we know which scenarios might happen. So we were prepared for that. But, you know, sometimes they cannot arrest you, they cannot take you to jail, they can detain you for long periods of time if they would like to. They can, you know, go through your stuff, you know, make it a mess, make you clean it up. But so that's what happened to me.
Looking for cigars.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, looking for anything. We actually have a rule that we don't bring anything back that we didn't go with.
Well, I was going to say, you know how many conservative, straight businessmen in New York City would pay, how much they pay for a box of Cuban cigars? I couldn't believe it. And stale ones that have been like stored like for 6 months, they'll still pay $500, $600, $700 for a box of them. So, I don't know. I actually did smoke one once. A friend of mine brought a few back. One time, it was a trip. He didn't go the way he went, you know, as a civil disobedience, but didn't make a big deal about it, and nobody bothered him. So he came with his cigars, and we all tried them. We had a big one. They were like this long.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried one?
Yeah, I had. We actually had the good ones. The best ones are the Cohibas. Right. And then the next one after that is Monte Cristos, which are famous because that's what Che Guevara would smoke. But then they have, you know, lesser brands as well.
Well,
but
with all those cigars, they must have a lot of great health care.
Yes.
They must need it. Even Fidel, right? Didn't he say at one point, they won't let me, the doctors won't let me smoke any more cigars?
Yeah,
right?
he quit actually.
Right, and they were his trademark, right?
Yeah.
His trademark.
Yeah, I mean, most of the photos that you see of Fidel, he's smoking a cigar.
Have you ever met Fidel?
I have not, but my first year there, we were actually taking part of the July 26th celebrations, which is basically their Independence Day. Yeah. And we were there, we were just a few rows back, and it was the 60th anniversary on the attack on the Moncada barracks, which is in Santiago de Cuba.
That's what started the revolution.
Correct.
Right.
They explain it as the revolution actually started back in the late 1800s, so it's just a continuation, and they still believe that the revolution is continuing today, just them resisting is part of the revolution. But yes, the revolution that many people know happened in, you know,
I don't have the dates right in front of me, but with the last trip, was that before, during, or after this new loosening of relations? Easing of relations.
So it was a little bit, it was after. They eased a lot of the relations in January 15th. Right. They made an announcement. making it easier to travel. There's 12 different categories that you can travel in as a licensed U.S. citizen. But while we were there, we had a 2-week contingent and also a 1-week contingent. So I was on the 2-week contingent, and while we were there, the day after actually is when the Cuban flag was raised at the Cuban embassy in Washington, D.C.
Were you there for that?
I wasn't in D.C., I was in Cuba.
I mean, in Cuba.
Yes.
I mean, well, didn't they just raise the flag at the embassy in Cuba? That was afterwards. That was
that was
like
after
a couple
I
of
got
days ago, right? Or yesterday, I think.
Yeah, the 14th.
Oh, I see. The 14th. Okay, so it was a little. All right, great. So what was the feeling? Did you actually talk to people in Cuba about that, or because they would see you're an American, did they ask you about that? Well, everybody in the Western Hemisphere is an American, right? A North
Correct.
American, Norte Americano, right? They ask you, Madam Norte Señorita Norte Americano, tell us what you think, or we'll tell you what you think, what we think.
You want me to explain what they thought?
Yeah.
So I'll explain a little bit about what they think and about what we think, or what I think as well.
Yes.
It's kind of along the same lines. They're very, a lot of people are very excited for the new possibilities that could happen, but they're also apprehensive because they know what the U.S. has done in the past, with the Bay of Pigs invasion and all of the terrorist activity that's happened, the bombing of Cubana Airlines in the 70s. So they know and they're aware.
Terrorist attacks against Cuba. By right-wingers and by CIA and all that kind of thing, which has come out well proven, well known, documented facts.
Yes, exactly. So they know that that's, that the U.S. government didn't just wake up and decide to care about the Cuban people. They still have an agenda. They still are the same goals to overthrow the established government and to put in place capitalism like it was before and to overthrow socialism.
Gangsters, drug traffickers,
casinos, prostitution,
the whole deal, right?
Yes.
Which, as we've seen in The Godfather and many movies, have actually almost joyfully talked about it as if it was a golden age, but it wasn't really a golden age for the Cuban people.
Not at all.
Under Batista, the former dictator.
Between just a few years, Batista's government had murdered over 20,000 Cubans, and there was no free health care, no free education. People were very, very poor. Even they just access to everything was not as great.
And so I think Mr. Trafficante and Mr. Marcello, who were the famous mafia leaders of the time, didn't have any problems. They had a very nice living conditions in their hotels and casinos and what have you. So that was all over. But then now, what's going to happen next? What happens now? Is there going to be a flood of American tourism? There's already a lot of European tourism, right? There's already a lot of rapprochement with the European people. There
are, yes. And just U.S. citizens alone, on most of them on licensed travel, has already risen. This year, I believe the statistics are 3 million U.S. citizens have already traveled to Cuba.
What's the attraction? Is it just Cuban Americans going back to see family, or is it actually Americans going there as a tourist destination?
So right now, technically, you're not allowed to visit as a U.S. citizen. You're not allowed to visit for touristic purposes. Those 12 categories include educational purposes, religion, journalism, stuff like that. But yes, I mean, people do go to the hotels, go to the beaches.
This is a place where marijuana is supposed to be illegal, where alcohol was illegal for a long time, and people go to Cuba, which is they're not supposed to do, right? Right, it's the American way. All right, so okay, that's very interesting. So tell us a little bit about, so the Cuban people are a little apprehensive.
Yes.
All right, what do you feel about it?
I feel the same way. It's great to see. I felt great to see the Cuban flag raised in Washington, D.C. I did not feel as great to see the American flag raised in Havana, just because of everything that's happened and all the work that we've been doing. I've only been doing this work for 3 years now, but people have been doing this since the 50s. This has been a huge long legacy of people fighting. We finally with the new relations, the rest of the Cuban Five were released.
Who are the Cuban Five?
So the Cuban Five were 5 men who came from Cubans who came to Florida in the early 90s because of, just like we were talking about, the terrorist activities that had happened, and
for somebody, you're from Florida, right?
Yes, I am.
And so as such, you know, I'm not sure which, we don't go in what part of Florida, but there's parts of Florida where your politics would not be welcome.
Yeah, not at all.
It would be pretty scary, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I've traveled to Miami quite a few times. I used to vacation there all the time.
Is your growing up as a person, as a Floridian, have anything to do with your interest in Cuba, or is it just... It did. Originally,
yes. It definitely, because the only thing that I really knew about Cuba, I remember just constantly hearing about Elian Gonzalez.
You were there at the height. That was your introduction, was the Elian Gonzalez fight.
But other than that, I mean, I knew that it was conditioned in me, you know, to know that Cuba was a bad country. We were supposed to be enemies with this country, and I had no idea for what reasons. And we were never taught about Cubans or Cuban history, even them being so close to our state. So that was definitely one of the things that sparked my interest.
So let's be descriptive. What's it like? So you come to the airport in Cuba, in Havana, right, the international airport.
Yes.
And where do you go?
We usually take a bus. We stay at an international camp. So there's a lot of different brigades that stay there. There's the...
a camp? What's that mean?
It's a kind of dorm style almost. We're not sleeping in tents. There are concrete buildings, but they're bunk beds, very rural living.
Outside of town? Outside of Havana?
Yeah. Yes. The particular camp that we stay in is in Artemisa province.
I see. So, and then what happened? What's the first day like?
It's different every year, but the first day is usually getting acclimated. It's usually kind of, we don't jump in right away to everything. One of the most important aspects of our brigade is that the history of our brigade is that we went to Cuba to work alongside the Cubans in 1969 to help harvest sugarcane. Yeah. So we no longer harvest sugarcane. We do sometimes. Last year we worked in the sugarcane field.
That's hard work.
Yes, very hard work, and
some of the hardest work there is.
Yeah, and our days now, before when that was like the prime reason, people just went down there with the brigade, the Venceremos Brigade, to work in the sugarcane fields or to do solidarity work, and now it's more symbolic. We do it several days that we're there, but it's become more of an educational trip.
Can you handle a machete?
I can. Somewhat. No, I'm not a pro by any means.
That's the main tool for a sugarcane worker is their machete, right?
Yeah, and they make it look so easy too, but it's not easy to use a machete.
Be careful; those things are dangerous.
Yeah.
Wow. So so you spent a couple of days symbolically chopping some sugarcane and being sort of Americans.
Yeah,
sugar.
Even the last 3 years. My first year we helped do construction work, and then the second year we were harvesting sweet potatoes, and then this year we were just doing a lot of weeding and raking. So it just keeps getting less and less.
Right. And so what else have you been doing? What else do you do when you're there?
So we meet with members of the national parliament, also provincial and municipal levels. We do a lot of seeing historical sites. This year we visited Santa Clara, which is where the memorial and remains of Che Guevara is located. We also visited the mausoleum to the martyrs of Artemisa.
What is that?
The people who fought in the revolution. There's two parts of the mausoleum. There's one part for the men and that were from Artemisa that fought in the revolution and died in the revolution before January 1st, 1959. And then there's the outside part of the mausoleum where the people who still fought in the revolution but who lived past the triumph of the revolution, there's still 3 empty spots actually. There's still 3 people that are alive today who will be buried there when they die.
Fidel Castro himself, right?
Not in Artemisa.
Okay. Well, let's not bury him yet. The guy's still kicking,
89
right?
years
Everybody's
old.
been trying to bury him, but he just won't die, right?
Yeah.
And most cigars were good for him too. So we won't bury him any sooner than we have to. All right, great. So tell us, now, there's a lot of things I wanted to ask you about. There's the natural beauty of Cuba, in part because it hasn't been industrialized, in part because of the blockade.
Blockade.
So in a way, that was like an unexpected sort of, if you're a nationalist anyway, on the positive side of things. So, and also there's like, you don't see McDonald's everywhere yet.
Exactly.
You don't see Burger King everywhere. You don't see any of that crap. So tell us, are we going to see like and I think I've heard people talking about this, it's going to be a big change where all of a sudden we're going to see the Americanization of Cuba, and it's going to be filled with American products. And I mean, it's already got, I love the 1950s cars, you know. Are we going to now all of a sudden be zipping around in Toyotas? I mean,
so that's one of the things that a lot of people are worried about, and it's one of the things I'm apprehensive about as well. But we did speak to the Cubans while we were down there about that this year, and they told us, you know, that they already have a model in place, and they're going to listen to every you know, corporation or company, their reasoning for why they should be in Cuba. But if their reasoning is not in line with helping the Cuban people thrive and have a better quality of life, then they will not be allowed to come into their island. And even and afterwards, if they do come in, if they do set a business agreement, and then they find out that, you know, their you know, reasoning is not for the Cuban people, then they will cease doing business with them.
Right, so they're going to still have that control at the top.
Correct.
And
they will own at least 51% of every corporation.
Interesting. But still we have the situation where, you know, we were speaking earlier about how many attempts were there on Fidel Castro's life by the United States, or people allied with the United States?
Yeah, it's been a lot. I don't know. I forget the exact number, but I know it was over 600 attempts.
600 attempts. And we
Still
know
alive.
from COINTELPRO, they tried to make his beard fall out because
Yes.
they thought that was a big part of it. They tried to give him exploding poisonous cigars.
They tried to put some type of disease or something in his wetsuit. Yeah, all types of stuff. They got
ending.
very creative, but
Right.
they
They
never
never were able to get to him with all that.
never were successful.
Right. Why do you? What's the secret to his success? In your opinion?
I think that he's, you know, because he's for the people. You know, that's not to say he hasn't made mistakes. He's come back and he's, you know, said that I shouldn't have done things that way, or, you know, I made a mistake here. But his number one goal was to make life better for everyone, you know, and the revolution actually helped most the people who were the campesinos, who were out in the rural parts of Cuba, farmers who came from practically nothing, and they took the land back from the corporations and the U.S. Companies, and they nationalized everything. They divided up land and gave, you know, farmers everything that they needed. My first year, we actually had one of our translator. He had previously worked for the Cuban government and went out to a rural part of Cuba just in the 90s and 2000s, and to just like take an assessment of what it was that they needed. And he came back and gave that information, and within just a few months to a year, those farmers had everything that they needed. They needed more land, more access to tools, stuff like that. So they were granted
so they
everything.
respond to people's needs.
Yes.
Right, the government there. And they still have that great healthcare system?
Yes. I myself have never been sick while I was in Cuba, but I've had several of our brigadistas and my friends have had to go to either a polyclinic or the hospital. And I remember last year my friend actually had her lip was swollen, and they didn't know if it was an allergic reaction to something, so they took her to the hospital. And within 3 hours, she was there, she was seen, and she received medication for the equivalent of about 30 cents.
That's amazing. So, you know, we're talking, everybody's like hand wringing about Obamacare, which is, I hate to say it, but it's like, you know, not so great.
Nowhere near socialist, that's
no,
for sure.
No, it's not. You have to pay for it. Number
Yes.
one, it's not single payer.
Exactly.
You know, they tell you what to do. It's still a private company.
Yes.
As soon as they you know, have any inkling that your salary's gone up, their rates go up.
Yeah.
You know, and the employers now just kick you. Don't have employee programs. Oh, go on Obamacare, right? Which eventually is going to stick the workers with the cost of it.
Exactly.
So it's not the greatest thing in the world, and it took years to get it. And you talk to people from Canada, England, Cuba, and they laugh at us. So tell us, that we have actually something we can learn from Cuba rather than the other way around? I mean, the U.S. is always saying everybody can learn from us, but we can learn from them.
Actually, Cuba was just came up with. They discovered a way to stop the transmission of. I just forgot which disease it is now, actually, but the transmission from mother to child during childbirth. So there's a lot of different vaccines and operations like this.
And they develop on their own.
Yes.
In their own research, their own hospitals, their own
Absolutely.
universities and everything within their country, and not depending on patented drugs and all the things that are involved with the commercialization of medical care and things like that, right, that we have today. And where you can spend $250,000 for a simple heart procedure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's
getting a stent
crazy.
is what, $80,000, and it takes like 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Right. I know. Okay, so I was just discussing this with somebody today, a lawyer. And so many people get rich on that, but it's off of the backs of the people in this country. So that's supposed to be a better system. Seems to have a pretty good system in. Now, others have said, well, how can you really ever, really address all the problems, health problems of the world without large companies that have billions of dollars behind them? I mean, is it possible to do it the way Cuba does it from the grassroots up?
I mean, I believe so. I mean, I think, within the last, 5 decades that Cuba has shown us that, you don't need these corporations, these companies to build that, and not only are they helping themselves in Cuba, but they're also sending hundreds of thousands of doctors to other places, such as Haiti after the earthquake. Cuba actually volunteered to send doctors to New Orleans after Katrina, and the U.S. flat out refused. Did not want them to come to help out, which is crazy. A lot of people don't know that fact. Yeah, and they they help out all over the world. So one of my favorite things about Cuba is in 1961 they decided that they were going to tackle the illiteracy problem. The literacy rate in Cuba in the 1960s was roughly in the high 60s. So it wasn't that great. It was a failing.
Like like Central America, like half the Caribbean, like Mexico, right? Try show somebody a map, and they try to make believe they can read it, and then you realize, oh my God, they can't even read a map.
And it's very prevalent here in the United States too. I know a lot of people can't even function in society.
Absolutely.
But they started the literacy campaign in 1961. They started in January, and very young people, I think the youngest person was 6 or 8 years old, all the way up into the late teens, volunteered to be teachers for people to learn how to read and write. So they did an assessment. They sent people out to find out who needed teachers, who needed to learn how to read and write. So they sent these young people out through all the cities, all of the rural areas in the countryside, and from the beginning of January to around December 12th or 15th, is just when they started coming back into the cities. They had raised the literacy level. People could actually just, even if it was just writing their name or learning how to read, very basic, they raised it to the lower 90%. And nowadays, after
as far
all
as
these
literacy,
generations,
now being able to read,
they've actually eliminated illiteracy completely. It's at 99%.
And people really can read.
Yes.
I mean, they don't lie to you. I mean, they really can read.
Right, they really can read.
And they do read. They carry books and read books. How about these things in the U.S. as well? Limited internet access, and and dissidents are imprisoned, and all this kind of stuff. The negative stuff. Do you have any response to that, or?
So as far as limited access to the internet, it is true. Up until a little while ago, the internet was very slow, and it still is, but there is a fiber optic cable underwater to Venezuela, which is how they get their internet right now. So coming from Venezuela to Cuba, obviously that's going to take a little while. I have accessed the internet. At the camp we stay at, they do have free internet access, but if you go into the hotels and stuff like that, you have to pay, which is not extremely accessible for most Cubans because of the cost.
They have internet cafes that people can go to?
There's 2 places right now in Havana that have free Wi-Fi, actually. One is the U.S. interest section, which is now the U.S. Embassy, and they also have this place, it's called Cacho art studio, and he's a very well-known artist in Cuba, who's done a lot of traveling with his art around the world, and he offers a Wi-Fi signal 24 hours a day, so Cubans can come and either get on the internet on the computers there or use their smartphones.
It's not like China, what I was reading, where like you know they just arrested 65,000 people for using the internet incorrectly. Going to the wrong. No,
there are things that are blocked. Pornography is blocked, and there's a few other things that are blocked, but Facebook is not blocked. Some people say Cubans are not allowed to have Facebook or Twitter. That's not true. They
interesting.
Do.
Okay, and we got 2.5 more minutes, so I wanted to give it to you, maybe to tell me some things you might want to tell me. We didn't talk about you, the great photographer, and tell us a little bit about yourself as a photographer. How did you get into photography?
So I actually went to school for TV production, but the school that I went to was not that the education wasn't on par. So I graduated not being able to really get a job in the field. So I just spent 2 years working, and then I decided I wanted to go back to school. And I actually made a list of everything that I really enjoyed doing, which is traveling, meeting new people, learning about new cultures, and photography. So I figured photography was a way to incorporate everything. So I went back to school for photography, and ended up moving here to New York in 2011. So I really enjoy doing my passion is documentary photography, as well as video and stuff like
so
that.
places like Cuba, for example.
Like Cuba, yes.
Be perfect for that, right?
Yeah, and I do. I like documenting a lot of graffiti and art here in New York City and all over the place.
Have you been to Hunts Point? They have the greatest. I used to work up there.
Hunts Point. I did a lot at 5 Points before it was torn down. That's another thing I really enjoy about Cuba is the arts are very appreciated.
They're appreciated. They're a big part of society, right? The arts,
it's not.
Always been, right?
Yeah, it's not criminalized like it is here in the States.
All right. I see. People enjoy it, of course, and it's got a political content to it, right?
Absolutely.
Of course, it's how and Nicaragua. When I was in Nicaragua, was beautiful. The anti-American graffiti everywhere. It was wonderful.
Yes,
it was wonderful. Right. I wish we could do that here. Very good. We have a minute left. Anything you'd like to add about your experiences in Cuba?
I just encourage everyone to check out either the Venceremos Brigade or get down there any way possible. We do have, I just would like to do a little plug. In September 16th through the 18th, we have Days of Action Against the Blockade in Washington, D.C. And
Which still continues, even though the president has said he doesn't want to, but it's going to be in Washington, D.C.
Yes. So that's our next thing. Like the Cuban 5 are now free, so the travel ban should hopefully be lifted very soon, and once the travel ban is lifted, then the blockade has to follow.
Right.
So,
but there's still some folks who are fighting against it, like Ted Cruz and some of these other characters.
Absolutely, that believe that it's a good thing to have a blockade on 11 million people.
Well, we don't think so. Okay, thank you very much, Desiree, for joining us on Let Them Talk. Very interesting, informative conversation about Cuba.
Yes, thank you so much.
Have you done again. Thank you.